Alright, welcome to the first Bad Martian hangout session. I was talking to a couple friends online today, and my buddy Ed posted that he would like me to go over my mastering process real quick. So I think that's a good place to start. It's an easy, quick tutorial. I'm going to open a tune that I'm mastering right now. I'm pretty close to done with it. What I'm going to do is I'll load the tune, I'll mute all the VSTs and everything that I'm doing to it, and I'll start adding them in one at a time and talking about why I'm using it. My mastering chain's pretty much the same every time. Sometimes I use a couple more plugins, sometimes I use a couple less, really depending on what the tune needs. If I get a nice stem master, and the PreMaster is sounding really good, and I don't typically use more than like 8 or 9 VSTs to finish everything up, and a lot of those are cutting stuff away and just doing very fine, minute EQing. You'll see. So what I'll do here is I've got a tune loaded up. It's a new one that I'm working on with John Mikey called Chips and Clips, and he kills the vocal on this, absolutely destroys it. It's great. So first things first, I always load the PreMaster onto a channel. You'll notice I have it assigned to track 1. The reason I do that is I like to do all my cutting and subtracting on that channel before I load it onto the master channel and start that effects chain. So first let me mute everything, turn my sonar works on so I can hear what I'm doing. I'll talk about that later, but to briefly explain it, SonarWorks is a VST that corrects the errors in your room. And I'm in an addition to the house right now, so it's very echoey. And there's not a lot of sound deadening in the room, and it's got fake wood floors, so there's a lot of echo reverberation just bouncing all over the place. So I got this software after my buddy Greg turned me on to it, and it's got a microphone that you record about, I don't know, 40, 45 points in your room so that it learns where the weak spots are, and it creates a profile for you, and then you load up that profile and it compensates for your room. It also works for headphones. You'll notice I have it on the AKG 240s, which is what I'm wearing right now. So that's the profile I'm going to use for this video. I'll go into that more in another video, but that's a quick overview. It just explains why I'm going to leave that on and take everything else off. It's just so I can hear what's going on. With everything removed, the volume will be a little quieter. Once I get to the last limiters, you'll see all the volume come up, but that's so that we can do some talking and you can hear me. But first things first, okay, I've got the track loaded. It's my PreMaster. I've already done the stem master. I've left a bunch of headroom, as you can see. There's a lot of space here to work. So the first thing I like to do is I put a little saturation on it, and I'll go back and forth on which saturator I use to start. But here, let's pick a section so we can show you what's going on. Okay, we'll take this section right here, and we're just going to loop it so we can put things on. You can hear it change over the same music. Let's go back to our mixer here, and the saturator I'm using for this one is Hollywood, and it's by Slate Digital. But I also use the London and the New York pretty frequently. It just depends on the sound I'm trying to get. For me, Hollywood sounds a bit warmer and not as bright and harsh, so I always start with Hollywood. Put a little saturation on it. It just kind of brings the tune to life as I get ready to work on it. And then I do all my cutting right off the bat. I like to subtract everything. That way when I'm doing my compression and limiting, I'm not compressing and limiting artifacts and frequencies that I don't want there in the first place. So for my first EQ, I'll do a Pro Q2. I know it's not the latest version, blah blah blah, but I like this one. I'm very comfortable with it, so I haven't upgraded, and you know, money's tight. On this first EQ, I'm really just cutting the low end, and I usually go back and forth between like 22 and 26, depending on the sub I've used. This one's about 23.5. I'll also cut out some of the highs, some of the harsh stuff. I layer my drums a lot. I use a lot of hat kits. So when those sum together, you get a lot of volume increase just from them playing together at the same time. So I'll make some cuts here already, and even make it sound not dull, but just flat. I don't want it to sound bright yet. So I've done those EQ points here. One thing I learned about the fab filters is I always want to put it on natural phase or linear phase, zero latency for some reason. When you start stacking VSTs or multiple Q2s, it just starts messing with the track, and you get certain tracks that are playing later than others. It hasn't worked out for me, and I have a pretty powerful computer, so I'm not sure exactly why that happens. But anyway, I found the way around it is I use natural phase or linear phase, and for this one I went with natural phase. So we've done our low cut, we've done a little bit of high cutting, some surgical on the kick and the snare where they thump around a little bit. You'll see I'm going after certain frequencies. I'm just trying to make a little dent in them, make it sound, again, just flat. On my second EQ, it's a mid-side. Again, natural phase. I'll do the mid-side this time in channel mode, and I'll take a little more bass out. I'll actually come up to 80, and I play around a lot on that depending on whether it's a sub-heavy tune or the bass has a lot of top end. I'll go around, 80 to 120 I play in there. I'll duck the highs out. Also, again, on the mid-side, this is really handy and gives a nice separation in the EQ. So that's the second EQ. Turn that on. And lastly, on the actual, track 1 channel, I'll do the sub. I'll make the sub mono. So what I mean by that is I'll open up Ozone, that's what I use for it, and I'll use their imager. So I'll close everything else out, I'll open the imager, and I usually go around 121. I want to say it's different for certain tunes, but it's not for me. I notice I'm usually around 121 on almost all the tunes right now. And what I mean by that is I'm just making everything below that frequency mono. I'm taking out all the stereo potential. And that's pretty much all I'm going to do in Ozone. So I'll close that out. So what we've done on channel 1, or insert 1, is we've loaded the track, we saturated it to kind of bring it to life in there, then we did all of our cutting. We cut the lows, we took the mid side up and cut more lows, we did cut some highs in there, just some of the harshness, and we made the bass mono. So I've done all the adjustments to the signal now that I want to before I start mastering it. Now we're on the master channel, and the first thing I've used lately is Soothe 2 by Oak Sound. This thing's a beast, and what it really does is it fixes the harshness and corrects it in the song. You can put it on any instrument, you can put it on a master. I'll go more into this in a separate video because it really requires its own video to explain everything. But I start off with Soothe 2. I actually load the presets on this and use them as starting points because the presets in this are programmed really well. And the first one is Balance to the Grammy Awards. I'm using that on the initial setting here. And I brought this section up a little bit, tailored it off a little closer here at 133, and brought this section up. This wasn't up on the preset. So just a couple adjustments, but it was a great starting point. And I'll do that a lot actually if I need to, because there's a lot of effort that goes into those presets. So why not use them as starting points and see what it does to your tune and where the settings are, and it'll kind of give you an idea as you go between them and look at the settings. Oh, okay, that's what it's doing. That's how it's changing it. Well, I really liked, how it presented the low end on this setting, and I really like how it presented the top end on this setting, and you can kind of go in there and do your own settings based on what you saw. There's nothing wrong with scrolling through the presets and seeing what they do to the tune. That's a great starting point. I'll roll over from there. Now I've got it cut, I've got all the EQ done, I've got the harshness out, I've got Bailey in the studio. Alright, once you've given your dog some love, you can get back to work. So where were we? Okay, so we've cut the sound, we've cut our low end, we've cut our mid-side low end, we've cut some of the harshness out of the top end, we made our bass mono. We've taken it to the master channel and applied the first soothe just to kind of get some of the harshness out and kind of salvage some of the mid to low. It really does a good job of that. And then right after soothe, what I'll do is I'll go into my first compressor, and I really like using the Townhouse for this. It's through Plugin Alliance, and it's by Brainworks. It's an awesome compressor. It's got a great sound to it, and one of the first things I learned about this is this filter right here. You don't want to compress anything that your bass. You don't want to compress your bass. You want to compress the top end of it. So I'm setting it pretty much right around where I made my bass mono. I'm using the filter, and I'm only compressing stuff above 121 Hertz right now. And I'm running at really minimal settings, and what I mean by that is I've got it wide open on the attack at 30, which is really lazy and slow. I've got it really quick on the release at 1, so we're not doing much here. I've got the ratio down to 2, and I've brought the threshold just to where the compression needle starts to move. You'll notice that's around 8.5. Just barely moving here. I don't want to do too much to it. I just want to get the sound of that compressor and get, you know, some of the artifacts that it puts in there, and just barely compress my sound. If you do compression a little bit with 2 different compressors, you'll get a better signal at the end of that than doing a lot of compression in 1 compressor. And you'll also get the benefit of those 2 different compressors' unique sounds. Every compressor has artifacts designed into it to emulate the hardware that it was designed after, and you can use that to your benefit if you're not working it too hard and losing those artifacts. So I'm done with this compressor already. You can tell it's not doing too much, but it is doing something, and it's giving us that Townhouse sound. And then directly from that Townhouse, I'll go right into the Shadow Hills mastering compressor. And on this one, I actually use a preset in there. And it's basically just the steel preset, which is like the hardest setting that you can go after, and I feel like that harshness is really good for drum and bass, so I've been using that. And I'll go in and I'll back the gain down a little bit and increase the threshold a little bit. You only have to do it on one side of this because it duplicates itself. You can run it separately, but I don't. And one of the things that I also changed is I switch it to dual mono. Dual mono gives it such a nicer processed signal. It gives it more of a professional sound, and it's hard to explain because I don't understand it as I should. I'm not an audio engineer. I'm just using the plugin to get my tune sounding better, right? But dual mono instead of stereo for a lot of my tunes works a lot better for me. And you can go back and forth and figure out which one works better for which tune, but I've been doing dual mono quite a bit, and honestly, if you understand it enough to explain it below, school me. I am not the guy that will get upset if I don't understand something. I have taught myself, I've done YouTube tutorials, so I'm not here to play like I know everything. That's not me. I just like writing the music. Everything else I kind of fumble through, but anyway, you also have to do the filter on this one. So I've got it set around there, the same 122, 121 Hertz. And that's really important. You don't want to compress the low end. I learned that too late. A lot of my tunes that were released early on are just, they're embarrassing now. Anyway, we've got the Shadow Hills added now, and the next thing I'll do is I'll do some EQing. I actually use a preset in here as well as a starting point. Mix tightener. I love how it just kind of sucks everything up together. It gives it a really nice sound. I made a couple adjustments here. If I was to go over exactly what I did, I'm not certain, but what I was trying to do was get the mid-range out a little bit more while not losing the dynamics. So when you pull it down, it controls it when it hits. This is the F6 RTA. I'm getting all, let's see, this one's actually a Waves plugin. They had a huge sale. So I'm using Slate Digital, Waves, and Plugin Alliance. This one's a Waves plugin. It's awesome. You can get it for cheap on one of their sales, but it does a really good job of EQing only when the EQ is necessary, not all the time. I'll run another soothe after that, because after running 2 compressors, you get some new artifacts from those. And although most of them are desirable and what we wanted, you want to cut out the ones that don't make sense and are hurting your tune. So I did very little work on the mid to low here. It just needed a little bit where it was kind of mudding up on me. And then I went after the high end again, which is usually where all my artifacts are, again, because I layer a bunch of my drum parts and a lot of hats and stuff. So when it sums, you get a louder volume presence. Anyway, we'll go over soothe in another video, but these are my settings for the second soothe. Then I'll saturate it again, actually, and I'm always using this Revival by Slate Digital for my second saturator, just because it's such a simple one to use. It's really just got a shimmer, which is the top part of it, and a thickness, which is, you guessed it, the bottom part of it. And I'll just put enough on there to barely hear it. If someone can tell you flat out, like, oh, you did great saturation on that, you've used too much saturation. So you don't want to use it to the point where you can hear it. You want to bring it to the point you can hear it and then back it off. So I'm pretty much always using Revival for the second saturator. On a tune like this, I'm pretty happy with everything how it is right now. So I'll start going into the limiting now, because I have it sounding the way I want. So the first limiter that I've been using is this Slate Digital FGX. And this thing's a beast. It just sounds so good. It's almost transparent, but you'll notice the RMS is up to 9.7. I'm running a good amount of gain on it. I've got very little detail, very little low punch, very little dynamic perception. I do have the constant gain monitoring on. And this first limiter is just to kinda, you'll notice by the needle, it's just to kinda tame everything, but not to bring it up to my final volume, and not to clip the peaks after my final volume. I'll use another one for that. So I've got this one set up, and the other one I'm talking about is the FabFilter Pro L2. You'll notice as soon as I turn this one on, the volume's going to go up significantly, because this is where I did my final volume. So what I mean by that is, I started again with a preset. I used the EDM transient, the extra transient preset. There's a lot of good presets here to mess around with, depending on what you want to get out of it. If you want to do moderate, safe. I went with loud because I wanted a nice loud drum and bass tune. Again, going for the extra transients so that it gives the impression, not only gives the impression, but it actually retains some dynamics as well. But I want to give the impression of dynamics. I don't want everything to be flat, squashed, blocky, and my final tune to just be one waveform. I don't want that. I'm not that guy. So when I bring the gain up on the last limiter, I bring it up to where I'm just clipping barely. You'll notice when it clips, it's clipping around 0.3, 0.8. It's not clipping much. It's going right up to the ceiling, but when it clips, it's very, very little. And that's what I like. That'll give me a nice full tune, but it retains most of the dynamics. So you get a warmer bass that subs a little bit harder. You get drums that expand in the space a little bit better because their hi-hats in between them aren't the same volume as the snare, and it's not a block of sound. I really love dynamics in the drums, especially because that's where you get the rolls and that's where you get the little in-betweens. And you miss that if you start limiting it too much and mastering it too hard, and it just becomes, noise. You've all heard those tunes where the hi-hat just becomes part of the break and it's all noise. And it's like one of the pet peeves of mine when I'm mixing, because it just takes up so much space. Anyway, after that, I usually just check everything on span, and I'm not looking for a block here. I'm just looking to make sure that nothing's out of line. Like everything's kind of peaking around the same space. I do like these dead spots, unlike other mastering engineers that'll tell you those are weak spots. Those are your dynamics. Like if you had everything limited to where it was down here, that's where you get that wall of sound, and I've just never been into that. So you'll notice my stuff Still has a lot of dynamics. It could probably go a lot louder, so you got to turn the gain up a little bit more. Retaining that clean sound so that those drums sound unique on the sound system, so that the vocal can be differentiated. There's a lot of reasons. The dynamics are great, especially in drum and bass. House, dubstep, I get it, you can bring it down a little bit more and lose some dynamics, but drum and bass you should retain as much as you can. I know it's still important to be loud, but retain as much as you can. And then that would be pretty much it for my mastering process. I would turn my Sonar Works off, because again it's coloring the sound so that I hear it a certain way. And then I would export a 16-bit wave. And yes, 16-bit on the final. And the reason for that is most record labels are digital these days, and Beatport and those sites, etc., they're just doing 16-bit wave. So if you bring it down here, you sum it here, then you don't have to give them a version, you know, the record label that they'll take, and then they'll bring it down again and process it again and take the chance that you're adding or losing information in that process. Just do it now. Just do the 16-bit. If a record label wants a different version, you just open it back up and export it as a different version. But I haven't come across that yet. Make sure and take that loop off, obviously. I've done that plenty of times where you export a tune, go to listen to it, and it's just the loop you were last working on. So make sure and undo that as well. Anyway, I think that's it for this tutorial. If you guys have any questions on the process or have a tune that you may want me to look at, or if you have any questions on the VSTs that I used, or the programs like Plugin Alliance is a program, Slate Digital is a program, I can answer any of those questions below. Just let me know. Really appreciate you guys tuning in. This is kind of my first video doing this, so be gentle. I know I fumble through stuff, but again, I'm self-taught and I just want to share what I'm doing, because I think the most important part is just making the music. That's what I like. But presenting music that sounds good is important too. And if I could show you guys something that helps you out, then awesome. Then I've done my job. So thanks for tuning in, and hopefully I'll make some more videos. We'll see how this one goes.